We need to hurry right now because Catherine, the writer of this article, this is an award-winning article on the attack on the UCLA encampment, and Catherine's going to come on in 7 minutes, so we're going to try to breeze through this article. Hopefully we'll get through it in time. This is the writer of the article. Editor's note, this article describes instances of violence that may be disturbing to some readers. In addition, this article contains 4 anonymous sources, students A, B, C, and D, who were granted anonymity for fear of retaliation from the university regarding their participation in the Palestine Solidarity Encampment. Were you at the protest? Yes. Here's the article. For Daily Bruin's full coverage of the UC Divest Coalition and Students for Justice in Palestine at UCLA encampment, see here. UCLA's campus echoed with screams and bangs amid violence. I'd seen something like I'd never seen before, and something I never would expect to happen. Not in the United States, not in California, and certainly not in Los Angeles and on campus, said Ismail Sinda, an alumnus who was in this Palestine Solidarity encampment at UCLA on April 30th. I saw people bleeding from their heads. I saw people on the floor. I saw people crying. From late in the evening of April 30th to early May 1st, the Palestine Solidarity encampment in Dixon Plaza was attacked by more than 100 counter-protesters and aggressors who sprayed aerosol irritants, launched fireworks, tore away the encampment's barricades, and hit those inside with metal poles and wooden planks. At 12:12 a.m. on May 1st, UCLA released a statement that it had immediately called law enforcement to campus. But LAPD officers did not begin directing the aggressors out of the area until 3 a.m. At first, I wasn't there. If that's what you guys are talking about, I wasn't there that night. No. I was there the next morning at like 6 a.m. At first, I couldn't understand why there weren't police officers immediately, said student A, who was in the encampment. But an hour in, and then 2 hours in, and then 3 hours in, it just reached the point where I was like, UCLA knows this is happening, and they don't care enough to protect the students. Student A, who arrived at the encampment around 10 p.m. on April 30th, said they helped individuals sprayed with the aerosol irritants and worked to fortify the encampment's barriers. They added that they saw student protesters who could not move, were unable to see, had difficulty breathing, and had been physically beaten. From the encampment, student A only saw some individuals throwing water bottles back at the aggressors, they said. They added that many other protesters said not to engage because it went against the encampment's purpose. Student B, who was in the encampment that night, said they felt Dixon Plaza had turned into a war zone as they watched the number of injured students increase. I heard some screaming, and I turned around, and one of my really good friends was on the floor rolling in agony, they said. I've never heard any of my friends scream like that before. It's still traumatizing until now, that I saw him go through that kind of pain. Student C said they were hit in the head twice while trying to protect both the encampment's barricade and their fellow students. They said that they were taken to the hospital by their classmates, where they ultimately received medical treatment, including stitches and staples. I thought I was going to die. I thought I'd never see my family again, they said. The only thing that kept me moving forward was my classmates, who were brave enough to protect the encampment from these terrorists. The same classmates that courageously brought me back inside the encampment after my attack. The same classmates who I relied on to save my life. Sinda, who briefly left the encampment to go to the hospital after a counter-protester sprayed him with an irritant, said he could still recall the threats the counter-protesters made against those in the encampment. He said those threats included, "I'll kill you, I'll rape your sister," and "What Israel does to Gaza will do to you." He added that when he asked a security officer why security was not helping, he was told that what the encampment protesters were experiencing was their fault. Following Sinda's visit to the hospital, where he said he deferred treatment to those who he felt needed it more, he returned to help protect the encampment. He said he quickly realized only the encampment protesters would protect themselves from the aggressors, who wore masks he likened to those in the Purge movies. Making the decision to come back was not an easy one, knowing that I was putting myself in danger again, Sinda said. But ultimately, in that situation, there was no other option for me, because how can I leave when I know people are being attacked violently? Cinda said even days after the attack, he could still feel burning sensations from the aerosol irritant. Student D, who was also in the encampment, said being sprayed felt like experiencing a sunburn, but 1,000 times worse. Student D also said they lost their vision for around an hour because of the irritants and were scared they would never be able to see again, adding that it was the worst pain they have ever felt. Student B estimated that police were called more than 100 times throughout the night, both by people inside the encampment and concerned friends and family members. They added that the operators told the callers that the situation was under control and to only call if it was an emergency, hanging up on multiple people. You can't continue calling unless you have an emergency, said a UCPD operator in a recording of a phone call obtained by the Daily Bruin. The following day, as students prepared for the police sweep of the encampment, many people were scared but doing anything they could to help, Student A said. At one point, they said students asked Executive Vice Chancellor and Provost Darnell Hunt, who had entered the encampment earlier in the day to talk with the students, to stay with them, but he declined. Most people were just in disbelief that after everything that happened the night before, and after a majority of UCLA students were assaulted on their own campus by foreign entities, that the university would come and destroy our peaceful protests, Student A said. It was really hard to wrap our minds around. Multiple students noted what they felt was a hypocritical response between the nights of April 30th and May 1st by the UCLA administration and police. No one was arrested the night of April 30th, despite the violence by counter-protesters. But on the evening of May 1st and the morning of May 2nd, more than 200 encampment participants were detained in the police-led sweep of the encampment. Cinda, who returned to the encampment May 1st, said he spoke with the police officer who told him to go home. Following his response that the protesters were there to stay peacefully, he said the officer hit him in the stomach twice, which left a bruise days later. Student D said they want to see better support for peaceful protests on campus. As an international student, I didn't expect to go to a new country and see something like that happen, they said. I thought in the USA, everybody gets to say what they want. But apparently, they only get to say what they want if the police like it, or if the government likes it, or if Gene Block likes it. Despite the violence of the two nights, many of the students in the encampment said they would participate in and protect the encampment again. Unequivocally, yes, Student B said when asked whether they would behave the same as the night of April 30th. I don't even have to think about that answer. Many students also said while violence at UCLA was horrible, they want the focus to remain on what they were fighting for: UCLA's divestment from Israel and a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. I had the luxury of getting sedated as they stapled my head back together. Currently in Gaza, there are zero fully functioning hospitals, Student C said. The UCLA community deserves justice. The people of Gaza deserve justice. Student B said they will never be able to forgive UCLA for the actions of the past week, and that they wish the campus community had been able to see what the encampment was like before it was swept. I wish people had come inside the encampment before and seen what a beautiful environment it was. I was at the time amazed by the beauty of our diversity, of how everyone was from different walks of life and different backgrounds, they said. We all united for this one cause. Whew, great article. Great article from Catherine. Catherine's watching right now. Okay, I'm just gonna give you a call right now. On Discord here. 1 second. I have to do this. Deactivate. Out. Okay. Hello.
Hi.
Hey, Catherine, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Well, I can hear you well. We're all good. So, Catherine, thank you so much for coming on and talking with me tonight. I'm really excited to have this conversation. Do you go by Catherine or is it Kat?
Either one.
Either one. Okay, cool. Well, let's start off. Just can you just introduce yourself to everybody in the chat and to me? This is our first time talking, so.
Yeah, I know. Okay, I'm Catherine. I'm here at UCLA. I'm majoring in both gender studies and political science. I'm pretty long. And relevant to this, I a Daily Bruin editor for 2 years, first national news and higher education editor, and then the news editor.
Okay. Um, are you on your phone or is it like you're on your laptop?
I'm on my lap.
Okay, it's fine, but it
Echoing.
it, it just is kind of like cutting out like the noise filter if is like too aggressive or something. I don't know if there's a if you go into your voice settings maybe um you might be able to
Okay.
try to like where it says the do you see in the voice settings like the input mode?
Yes.
Do you have it on like there's like the input sensitivity thing? You might just want to like put that way lower.
Okay. Is that better?
It does. It sounds better now, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, cool. So yeah, we just read your article, the I thought I was going to die about that night on April 30th. Can you kind of just like talk me through like before the encampment even happened, you know, what was the beat that you were covering at the UCLA Bruin and also like kind of you know, I mean, as it was starting, what was your like initial reaction to it? You know, how did you interact with it as a journalist?
Yeah, so at the time, I was the news editor, which meant that I did not have a specific beat, but as soon as um, the campus started responding to October 7th and the genocide that continued to follow in Palestine, I took the lead on covering that with one of the beat editors, but that was mainly the two of us focusing on that. And I just remember being already really confused, within a couple weeks of how newspapers were reacting, but not on, like, a national level. I knew that was always going to be very biased toward the United States and whatever they were doing, but at, like, the college level, the local level, I was really surprised that there weren't, like, editorials for ceasefires right
Mm,
away, um, editorials then, calling to protect journalists who were already being killed and targeted in Gaza, and I, as the news editor, could not really interact with the editorial board at the Daily Bruin, and so, I couldn't even tell them that I thought they might, like, want to write something on this, or it would be seen as overstepping and then putting bias in my own work, but I didn't see it like that.
yeah, I think that's definitely something I wanted to kind of talk with you about because I think um I mean, I don't know about you, but like there's nothing like more radicalizing than like being in a space like the encampment and then going home and seeing how media is covering that kind of moment. And so, I mean, as like a journalism major, as somebody who wants to go into this as a career, I assume, like, what was that kind of experience like for you? Just seeing the dissonance between how between what you were experiencing when you would go to the encampment and how it was actually portrayed in the media.
Yeah, it was really insane, especially that April 30th night, but really just the whole time, there were just these labels of it being anti-Semitic and Gene Block saying all sorts of things that were really just inciting the violence that did come about, and I found probably the most, like, directly radicalizing experience of that, period for me was that Saturday night because a lot of the grown men, a lot of whom were from Beverly Hills, came that night, and they were directly harassing me and videoing me and taking pictures of my press badge, and the only people who checked on me, who followed me afterward, who made sure I was okay, were people from the encampment who I didn't even know. And then, like, my paper doesn't really say anything about it. Um, they never asked me if I was okay. I ended up ultimately getting attacked by that person who was filming me. So that was really radicalizing for me to see just the cognitive dissonance within even my own newspaper because I couldn't understand how I was having such a different experience seeing the encampment than it felt like so many other people were.
Yeah, totally. Um, I do want to talk about the attack and everything, but I think like first, I'd love to stay on this like topic. Like, um, so there was a lot of discussion of while the encampment was happening, and a lot of media that I noticed were getting a little like, I think like the media in general felt very angry and like they felt like upset that they weren't allowed to like just like walk into the encampment and document it exactly how they wanted to, which I always found kind of rich because people like you can't just go up to any cop and ask for a statement that represents the entire LAPD. You can't go up to any person who works at UCLA and get a statement that represents the university. And yet they wanted that same kind of like they wanted that dynamic to be to exist with the students, right? Like where they
Mhm.
could just grab any person, and then they were very upset that they had media liaisons and that they weren't just allowed to come in and film whatever they wanted. What was the conversation in the UCLA Bruins like in the Bruin like newsroom? What was that conversation like there? And then also like how what kind of conversations were you guys having around like bias in that moment in general?
Yeah, I think I understood immediately why people weren't allowed into the encampment, and I found that to be just really generally smart of the organizers to decide to do that. But the media liaisons, I can only imagine how hard it was to organize that and how to try to make just such a collective statement on behalf of such a large number of people who weren't affiliated with an organization. I had understanding for that. I don't think always my peers at the Daily Bruin did, but I think that mostly came from frustration of not being able to just talk to someone immediately and have questions answered. At that time, a lot of this did happen a little after, but there was conversations in regard to my biases toward the pro-Palestine movement, mainly in reference to the media liaisons I was talking to. And so I was told like I couldn't interview one anymore because after April 30th, she had given me a hug and said, "I'm so glad you're okay." And so we were already like the biases conversations continued long after, but they definitely started with not getting too close to the media liaisons, which is kind of difficult when like to establish a good rapport with them is how you're able to get an accurate and reliable source. And so that was always really confusing to me, but generally I don't think we were talking about biases as much because we had spent a whole year making it clear what our bias was, and it was kind of already baked into the newsroom as the idea of centrality and neutrality when in actuality it wasn't, but I think it was just so like set in stone already from other protests that had happened.
Interesting. So, like, yeah, because I mean, I totally agree with that treatment of bias in like a news media setting. Like, that you don't like nobody is unbiased, and like you don't have to look very far into the coverage of this specific instance to like very clearly see that. And so, like, this striving towards non-bias is, in my opinion, like is futile and of very very little value, right? So but it is interesting that like as a newsroom there's like kind of a collective moment where you all determine together that this is how we're going to report on this. How do you think that affected the way that people on the campus or people in the larger world like read the Bruin, and how do you think that changed people's like perception of your coverage?
Yeah, I think throughout the year up until the encampment, the campus community's view of the Daily Bruin was very negative, and I completely understand why. The conversations that we were having in the newsroom that ended up leading us to this like sort of stance we had come to take of not making any comment whatsoever of the genocide. And that was just seen through so many articles that we wrote. We really lost trust with the campus community. But I do think like mainstream media outlets were kind of applauding our coverage of thinking we were so brave for being near these protests and amid them and reporting on them when never once did I feel concerned at all for my safety. And like these people all knew I was journalists. They all did not like us, but yet they would still treat us with respect. And so I think once we got to the encampment, people started to look a little more favorably on the Daily Bruin, but I think that was especially by virtue of the coverage on April 30th, because so many news outlets were saying clash and violence sparked on both sides. And I really do feel like we were the only established media outlet that was doing on the ground coverage and reporting in that manner. But then I wish kind of the momentum had kept up after that. I think people are starting to not trust the Daily Bruin anymore again, but I am glad that there was like that one period of time and that one night of coverage that people felt was a true representation of what had happened to the encampment.
Yeah. So can you kind of talk me through like what was that night like for you? When did you arrive at the encampment? How did you know what was happening? And then, when, and also like when you were there, like there wasn't very much like media as far as I know, like I watched it live from home through Film the Police LA's live stream and like a few other like independent journalists that I know that were documenting it. But outside of that, like ABC 7 had a helicopter above, but like, was there anybody on the ground? Were there any like mainstream media outlets that actually saw and witnessed what was there?
Yeah, not really. I had been there since like 5 to 6 p.m. because someone had entered the encampment that night. Some like weird man, as always, trying to invade the space. And so I was just kind of out there like following that, but I had had the planned shift of covering the encampment from like 8 p.m. to 12 a.m. And so I was just already there, and I so starkly remember sitting on the ground eating like a late dinner with two of my reporters, and all of a sudden just like this Meow Mix cat theme music comes on, blasted through these speakers, and I was like, "Okay, I think we should start packing up," and so I brought all of our stuff back to the office and already on my way, it was just in Kirkhoff, but it's still a pretty far distance. I could hear the screams of the baby that they started playing, and I just knew, like, in that moment that this was going to be a really bad night, and I passed a group of men wearing masks and black clothing, and it didn't even cross my mind that, like, what happened could happen. But just seeing that, I already knew, and it was really disappointing that there weren't that many mainstream media outlets there. I can't remember which outlet this was from, but it was they weren't like CNN or New York Times, but a little lower level, but they said, "Oh, I'm off the clock now. Okay, I'm leaving." And then they
Oh,
just left and no one came and took their place. And I remember talking about that with a different reporter, and we were just like, "Oh, okay." And she was like, "That's actually really normal, like, if it goes off like, if they're off the clock at a certain time, most of them might not choose to continue covering, especially something like this." And what was really crazy to me was that the Daily Bruin was really mad at me for wanting to stay out there. Um, it became, like, a really large thing, um, because I said well, they said, "I don't understand what we could glean on the ground beyond what we could get from the live stream," which was the ABC 7 live stream, and so I said that was bad journalism. I, as the news editor, refused to allow us to do that. They did force me to leave for a period of time, but then I kind of got to this point where I was like, "Oh, you can see people with cameras and, like, people reporting there. They're on the grass and safe and away from all of the chaos." And so they said that we could go out again, but, like, me and the other journalist and the photographer immediately went straight to the middle of Dixon Plaza, like, we weren't gonna stay on the side, but it was just really crazy to me that even the student newspaper for UCLA wasn't going to directly cover their peers being brutalized and attacked, and I still can't get my head around that, the fact that that happened.
Yeah, and I mean, it became a lot more personal. So can you talk about what happened as you were leaving that night, and then also like what was the response inside of the newsroom and from like the institutions that you're a part of? How were you treated after that?
Yeah, as I was leaving with 3 of my Daily Bruin peers from Dixon Plaza, we were passing by a group of police officers who were standing intermingled with the people who had just been attacking the encampment, and one of them recognized me, and I knew his voice. I knew it was the man who had videoed my press badge from Saturday, and, he said, like, "Let's follow them," and got this group of 10 guys, and it just feels, like, almost comical that he, like, even said that, like, "Let's go follow them," like, it was so organized right next to police, and they were trying to not let me pass, and anytime I would try to push past their arm, they would, like, start screaming, like, "Assault, assault," and then finally, when, just a group of them came so close, they sprayed us with something, it got directly in my eyes, and I couldn't see for, like, an hour afterward until I washed them out, but they struck me in my chest, and then they ended up pummeling one of my peers to the ground and just kicking him on the ground, and we had to literally pull these grown men off of him. Um, as we walked back to the office, we passed these security guards, and at that point, I couldn't see. I was doubled over, and they refused to help us. They refused to take us to the Daily Bruin office despite the fact that these men were still following us and would have kept following us if a different community member hadn't finally stepped in, um, and really helped on our behalf. Um, I was later insinuated to multiple times by my Daily Bruin peers that if I hadn't made the decision to stay out and cover what happened on April 30th, that we wouldn't have been attacked and that it wouldn't have been this whole thing, and you can tell that it was kind of like, "Oh, your friend wouldn't have gotten hurt if you hadn't decided to stay there," and there were a couple insinuations that I was over dramatizing what had happened to me, and it was really disappointing to know that my 20-year-old, 21, 22-year-old peers were just behaving like this, and I still so starkly remember, and I'm pretty sure it's still up on their website, the tweet that says, "4 Daily Bruin staffers were attacked." Um, but they never said by who. And I just
Yeah.
remember seeing the comments that and, like, starting to cry because it was like all the other news outlets, what they do when journalists in Gaza die, and they just say, "Journalists died in Gaza," but they don't say that it was an Israeli airstrike that targeted them, that killed them. And so it's just crazy that there was this parallel, and it was such a different degree, obviously, of harm, but just the fact that it was even paralleled in the first place in a college newspaper was just really, really unsettling to me. And then lastly, no one ever reached out to me from, the university. They said they would if they, like, knew of people who had been directly impacted, and I know that they know, seeing how I was all over mainstream media, and they still never reached out to me, and still have failed to, so, yeah, I got 0 support on that front, or from the Daily Bruin.
I'm really sorry that that happened to you and that the responses, everything. Thank you for sharing all that. I know it's like probably still like very a lot of trauma that you're like working through and stuff. So, um,
Absolutely.
Yeah, can we let's just can we kind of go back to the encampment itself, and I just kind of like want to reflect on like what that moment was, because I do think like the mainstream media's coverage of it is like all that exists for a lot of people who weren't there, right? Like for people
Yeah.
who didn't experience it firsthand, like you and I did, I think that the image of it is so far removed from that. So are there any like, specific moments, or any kind of like vibes that you want to share from your being there and documenting it,
Yeah.
outside of the attacks on it? What was it like actually inside of the encampment?
Yeah, there are so many memories that I have of watching that were just beautiful. When people inside the encampment, um, prayed, there would be those not praying standing around them, protecting them from the media who was obviously trying so hard to get these pictures and just be blatantly disrespectful, and the fact that these were students and protecting their fellow students in such a display of love, and that's how I felt it. I thought that was beautiful. One of the nights, someone from the encampment brought me inside, because it was one of the nights that they were harassing me, and they were very adamant. I was like, "Oh, no, it's okay," and they brought me inside, they gave me water. I sat with this girl in a tent, and it was, like, the most beautiful moment I've ever experienced at UCLA. Like, she knew I was a reporter. They all actively, at this point, were not happy with our coverage up until then, and she was just so kind. She acted like she didn't know, and she offered me food, offered me blankets, offered me to sleep for me to sleep there, and I so wish I could have, but, just, like, the little moments of niceness from all of them, like, I remember seeing this guy and him giving me a thumbs up, to make sure I was okay, and he was the one, like, in the middle of a protest chanting, and it was just these little displays of kindness that you saw to each other, that you saw them give themselves. Obviously, as with any space, there are things positive or sorry, negative experiences that happen, but I do think overwhelmingly for how many people entered the encampment, it was an incredibly beautiful space, and one that I really hope will be remembered on UCLA's campus. And I really just hope that students who weren't involved and students to come actually familiarize themselves with what happened. The reason why I chose the article you were reading at the beginning to end with a quote of someone saying how beautiful the encampment was is because that's what I think should be remembered about it, not the violent police sweep, not the violent attack from community members, but just the success of having a space like that for a week and the resilience of them. And yeah, it was really great. I love thinking about it. It kind of helps ground me, just to remember and like looking at pictures from inside the space.
Yeah, totally. It's like I get very emotional when I think about the encampment, and even like in subsequent protests, or like whether they be protests or trying to like reestablish the encampments that I've been to since, like just making that drive to UCLA. I get about halfway through before I'm sobbing and just like trying to process all this stuff. But it's also, yeah, it is like a moment that I think we should reflect on and like try to like center ourselves in, because there's a lot of hope at that encampment as well. I think as like dire as things were, like seeing the community support and seeing people out there and like taking the risks that they were, um, was really, really like beautiful and hopeful. Also, and that's like something that I try like with my quote unquote coverage. Like being like a live streamer, live trying to live stream that environment, and navigating the both like the media liaisons and everything with regards to that. Like that's something that I really wanted to capture with my coverage, and then I hope that I could give to my audience was like this isn't just like a um This isn't just like the 10-second clip of like conflict that you're getting on your nightly news. Like there is hours and hours of people you know being like in community and learning from each other. Like the amount of like consciousness like that was being like spread and expanded at that encampment was really really breathtaking, you know. Um
Mhm.
yeah.
Yes.
Do you have any questions for me?
Yeah, I mean, have you ever, like, tried to cover something similar like this, like, live streamed about it, or yeah, just
Well,
what has been your experience with protests before?
yeah, so live streaming, no. But I was like a photographer, and like I usually bring my camera. I'm a documentary like filmmaker, so I
Mhm.
usually bring like a lot larger camera and like film, and then go home and download it, and it sits on a hard drive, and nobody ever sees it, you know. And so like
Mhm.
yeah, I was like when I was in college, way back when, it was Occupy, and so Occupy Chicago was where I was at, and so that was like a real big radicalizing moment for me, taking place, taking part in that encampment. And I saw a lot of like I saw a lot of similarities between the UCLA encampment and Occupy, but at the same time,
Mhm.
so many differences. And like the students were so much better organized. They were. I just felt I was personally just in shock and like awe at the students the entire time, and how inspiring they were. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and I think like again, like I think this is a real eye-opening moment, as every like mass protest movement is, to like participate in something and then to go home and like see how it's covered and see what the how the media works with it is very very interesting, and something that I think like everybody should experience at some point, because it really does kind of like just give the game away, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. What were your thoughts on the media coverage of Occupy? Was it the same?
Oh, it was. I mean, it was similar, but like obviously, there's like specific insidious aspects of like covering like anti-Zionism.
Yeah.
However, I think like with Occupy, it was very similar, where it was like, they were taking like the most the most extreme, the most like ridiculous person, and interviewing them and putting them on camera, and then using that to like smear the movement, or of course
Yeah.
like any moment that the students would like use like a fraction of the violence that the police are levying against them, that is going to be like broadcast and shared everywhere, you know um so like the poor coverage was always there. And then even like through like Black Lives Matter from like 2014 until like 2020, like that movement was uh completely smeared and slandered by the mainstream media, until the moment when it kind of shifted after George Floyd. And for a while, like the liberal media was like more agreeable with it. But then once the protests really started to take off, it flipped again very quickly. um yeah, it's I don't know. I mean, I think in general, like they, it's kind of a cliche, but like this idea of like being neutral in a time of like injustice is like choosing the side of the oppressor. Like I think like a lot of these media outlets like strive for neutrality, and that almost always ends up landing you in a way where you have to report something bad about the protest. Like
Yeah.
to be neutral, you can't just be like, oh well, here's their demands, here's what they're asking for. You also have to like couch it in some kind of like, here's why they're actually bad, like. And
Yeah.
I just find that like really really dishonest and unnecessary. But
Absolutely. Do you think there's any hope for the future of journalism?
oh, for the future of journalism specifically.
Especially specifically in the United States. Yeah.
Yeah, I think yes. I think like
Mainstream.
there's always going to be, small like local and independent journalists who are doing a good job. and are making
Mhm.
that. I think even I would even say maybe now is like it's even easier for them with like platforms like Substack and for
Yeah,
better or for worse X and things like it's easier
yeah,
for them to not be like held to the standards of like the big superstructures of like mainstream media. Somebody like Taylor Lorenz is like an example of that in my opinion,
yeah,
who we saw her with the Washington Post and like the shit that she was the standard that she was held to, and now that she's doing her own thing, I think is like a lot better of a journal. Her work is a lot better, like and it's
yeah,
like improved, right? So, um, I think I do have some hope. But I also like I think hope is not like and we talk about this on my stream a lot. In my opinion, hope is not a rational choice. Like it is like an imperative. Like we have to maintain hope, and we have to like it's a discipline that we have to like fight and like work to maintain. And like like nothing is inevitable, right? Like none of this
yeah,
stuff that we're facing, none of the scary things that we have anxieties about in our future, none of that is inevitable. If we want to, we can do it differently, and we can get together and collectivize our struggle, and hopefully solve some of this stuff. But
yeah.
it is hard. I understand it's a bleak moment that we're in, but I think we just have to like be hopeful. If we're not hopeful, then what do we have?
I know, I know. I do find hope in the smaller media outlets and the smaller journalists who are working independently and even some podcasts. So, I just hope that more people start to realize that that's the journalism they should often be looking to.
Yeah. So what are your plans going forward? Where can people keep up with you? Where can people follow? Are you still you graduated, right?
No, I'm a senior.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So, stay tuned on my Twitter when anything happens on campus. I'm posting on there. And then um, if you follow Poppy Press, it's a journalism thing that me and some of my friends are doing, and we're gonna kick it back up this quarter. And we'll also be reporting an attempt to report better on things that are happening on campus. So yeah,
Cool. Well, yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what you report on it. And
yeah. Thank
if anything pops off there, like keep an eye out for my hair or my eyes or something. If you can identify me behind the mask,
Okay, sounds good.
come out and say hi.
Okay, I definitely will.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Is there anything else I didn't mention that you wanted to talk about?
I don't think so. This was great. Thanks for giving me the space to reflect.
Of course, of course. I really appreciate it, and I think all the audience did too. So,
Yeah,
everybody's spamming chat claps for you in the chat right now. So
perfect. Thank you.
okay, thank you, Catherine. Take care.
You too. Bye.
Yo, what a W.